See if I can do that without hitting my head. Hey, there's been a lot of talk about bass season around here at New Perspectives Music, and it's all been culminating around this, the Apeiron bass, which is getting a new facelift and development. Actually, a whole bunch of them. I'll talk more in depth about the history of the design and the instrument later, but let's just get going on cutting some. So here you can see I'm using my center square, my favorite tool that I invented, and is available over at squaretools.com. But just find the center of 5 fingerboards. And this is the first biggest difference in the way I'm manufacturing these. Well, first off, I'm making them in a larger batch, because every time I make one, it kind of just sells, and then I have to make another one. So I thought I'd try to actually stock up my store a little bit with them. But I also wanted to explore the design a little more and see if I can make the instrument more versatile. Do fretted versions, do 5-string versions, and so I had to label all of these fingerboards because they're each going to actually be a little bit different for each instrument. And I start with the sort of heartbeat inlay, and here you can see I just cut that first, and then I seal the wood so I can fill it with epoxy, and then go in radius and cut the fingerboards. I don't do batches this big that often, and if I were to do this more frequently, I could probably make some jigs to make all this a little bit easier. But for now, I'm doing, like I said, they're all different. You can see all the labels there. So I'm just going through and doing them, sort of keeping notes and making sure I don't screw up, which of course I screwed up once. You'll see in this next clip here that the second fingerboard from the left no longer has, look up there, no longer has the inlays because I made a mess up in my settings, and so I decided to just make one of these a version without any inlay at all, because some fretless players prefer that. And then of course they're not all fretless, some are getting frets, so I have to cut those in as well. This is all local maple I'm using, of course. I tend to use maple for the center core of this instrument because I know it's strong and it's inexpensive and it's local, so it really fits in with my eco-friendly mission. Is a wood that can be found pretty much anywhere in the world, and it grows quickly and easily. But then I can have some fun with some colors and stuff on the other parts of the guitar that are less important structurally. The other big difference in the design is that the Apeiron has traditionally had a closed top that hides the electromagnetic pickup that I put inside, and normally the fingerboard and the top are all one piece, but I actually forgot to film cutting these out. This time I cut the tops from other pieces of wood, and I found this to be a more efficient way to use the wood. Then I also use wood bridges and knobs that I cut, which I was able to then cut from other pieces of wood. And so this way, instead of having to have this one giant piece of wood, I was able to use all these smaller pieces of wood and be a little bit more efficient with the way I do things. And so now we'll have to glue them together a little bit differently as well. Now feels like a good time to take a little walk down history road and look at the iterations of this bass in the past. This is the original one that I made, and the whole concept was about doing this one-piece top with the integrated bridge, and I hadn't quite figured out how to hide the pickup yet, but I wanted to just basically be like a tree with strings was sort of the idea. And so I made this out of oak and poplar, and there's a lot of the comments on this were talking about how, of course it wasn't gonna work or last because it wasn't made the way basses are supposed to be made, and it was made out of these non-traditional materials. But so I've been kind of beating the heck out of this thing for the past 3 years, and it does everything I want it to do. It sounds exactly like I want it to sound. It's stable. It's in tune. Because it's fretless, And even the integrated nut and the bridge have yet to show any signs of wearing down or causing problems. Now, that doesn't mean that I think I should make them like this anymore. I definitely think the improvements I've made on these other instruments make them more practical and usable instruments. But I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it this way either. And with all the development and the experimentation that I've done and the growth in this design, there's still a part of me that thinks that I was onto something with the first batch, and I think I might maybe even do a like an OG reissue of this first one. And the only difference I would make is hide the pickup and maybe make the bridge removable. I don't know, but I like the knobs on the back and like that look. So there might still be more developments for this bass in the future. Here's a little look back at that first bass that I was just playing, which I made in May of 2021, exactly 3 years ago, just about to the day. And you can see how it has that one solid piece on the top, and that was really the inspiration of the design. In that video, I compared it to a bass I built myself in the 1990s, one of the first instruments I ever made. It was also inspirational in it. Fretless bass, the sort of idea I had. Well, I just finished version 2.0. Let's talk about it. So the name came from an open source discussion, and thank you, Darian, for coming up with this great name for the base. And you can see I've already made some huge improvements, including a better thumb rest, and I put a removable bridge that was not adjustable but removable. But I still had the knobs on the back. I also put a little cutaway for people that wanted to pop and slap a little bit. These improvements made this version 2 really a lot more functional. But of course, by August, I developed it just a little bit more. Version 3 put the knobs on the front for all the crybabies who said they couldn't play an instrument with the knobs on the back, but I made them sort of recessed and hidden with wood, and I also made some different types of bridges to experiment with, and I added aluminum ferrules into these holes to help keep the wood from wearing down as the strings run through the body. And of course we have to discuss this little excursion that I made in October of a fretted 5-string full-length 34-inch scale bass I made for Prince Porter of the band Cheem and Similar Kind. He's a great bass player. Go check this guy out. He plays a lot of my basses. Version 3.5 is almost identical to version 3. I just added a battery box for easier access to the battery, and I made the bridge height adjustable with some just traditional, like tune-o-matic style adjusters, so that's still wooden bridge. And this is the version that we're working off of now until today, when I decided to make the top piece and the fingerboard from separate pieces of wood. It's the only difference, really. So you all know the deal by now. I make guitars for a living, mostly custom builds for clients, and I have some for sale over at newperspectivesmusic.com. And I'm also really into the idea of making as much stuff in-house as possible. Like I make a lot of my own pickups that I share with you here, and I sell over at that website, and I make some of my own hardware for my custom instruments that I'm not selling over there. But I do sometimes just buy hardware, like normal stuff, things that I'm not quite making in-house yet. And so recently I went, and I was from a manufacturer overseas that I've worked with before, and I just stocked up on a bunch of like just sort of basic parts, like tuning keys and bass tuning keys and bass bridges and guitar bridges, the things that you can go and just buy pretty much anywhere. But I thought I could save myself a few dollars by buying them in bulk, so I'm not paying as much per. But now I have more than I need, so I put some up on my website for a little bit more than what I paid for them, not a lot more. Maybe I can beat some prices of some other retailers out there. Maybe I can't. I don't know. But if you're in the market and you're looking for stuff, specifically bridges, tuning keys, and truss rods, I got a lot of truss rods. My website, newperspectivesmusic.com, is a place you can go check out and see if maybe you can save a few bucks by buying from me instead of, some big evil corporation. I only advertise from me. All right, back to the show. And now we are back to the present, cutting out the main parts of the body for another batch. And so here is part of what I'm experimenting with too, like that base that I just used for reference, so I knew safe places to put my mounting screws. Didn't have the closed faceplate. That was from the last one that I made. I made a mistake on one. I ended up making that top to cover up my mistake, and I really liked it. So that's inspiring some of this design change. And I always talk about my Avid CNC. It's the heart and soul of my workshop, and this is just an example of how I'm able to sort of compete with these big factories, because it's really like having a second me in the shop. And all the time that CNC router is running, I am doing other things, like doing the important stuff, the sanding and the finishing and the fretting, whereas like all the skill isn't really involved in what that router is doing, or even the human touch. Like all those just basic shapes following templates, I have a machine that can do it, so I can do the important things. And that makes me, like I said, able to really produce and keep costs down. One of the things I wanted to do while making these and designing was to use less wood. In the past, I had made just full blanks, and then I always go and save all the wood that's worth saving, of course. But here you can see I have, like this, I'll probably just burn that for firewood, and then I'll cut this off here. But then I have this nice block of chestnut I can still save for other stuff, and I can save this piece of maple I can use in a glue up to make another neck or another body in the future. So waste as little as possible. These files take a long time to cut because they're two-sided and there's a lot of 3D carving, which is a little bit slower. But it doesn't really matter because, like I said, I put my headphones on, I listen to some music or some podcasts, and I do all this other work. And every once in a while, I just have to go over and maybe flip something on the machine or replace a blank and then get the other one going. In this particular case, each one of these instruments is different. Because like I said, I'm experimenting with the design. So I really had to kind of keep my wits about me and make sure I didn't cut the 5-string file in a blank. I had already started cutting a 4-string file in, but it wasn't too big of a deal. But again, I'm laying frets. I'm putting finish on things all the while this machine is doing its job and requires very little babysitting from me. I love my Avid CNC. It comes highly recommended, and no one's paying me to say that. The way I work with reclaimed and sort of offcuts and locally sourced stuff does mean that I have a lot of repair work to do sometimes on the wood that I'm using, and this case is no different. Sometimes I do it and when it's a blank before I run it through the CNC, but sometimes I wait until I have the instrument shape cut out, so I'm just repairing the parts I need to repair. On this instrument, I was doing a bunch of epoxy fills on some rotted away parts of some of this very, very old chestnut. This stuff is from like the 1800s, and there's just some spots and some cracks that I fill in with epoxy. And so that's usually all I need to do, but there were some of these that had some cracks in that were like a little more disturbing to look at. I'm not concerned about them coming apart, but I don't want them to grow. And so I thought I'd put some butterflies in, but I had this great idea of making butterflies that look like X's. I thought that was a little more rock and roll than butterflies. What I did not take into account was the radius of my tool that I was using, my little pattern router bit, and so the corners on these didn't come out as good as I wanted them to. But I did go and make another template that worked a little bit better on another base. But so here you see it's the same process like all furniture makers that have to put butterflies and stuff. The guys making slab tables and stuff, they put these big butterflies in where it's a cross grain that goes over a crack to help keep the crack from separating. So you're adding glue as well as wood facing a different direction and structure and support to something that could potentially be unsound. And like I said, these I don't really think are actually going to go any further. This wood's pretty dry, but I wanted to be on the safe side, and also it looks cool. It's fun to play woodworker every once in a while. I made a video a million years ago where I made some butterfly router templates that worked a little bit better with this router that I'm using. And this is like most guys will do this with the chisels like the traditional way, and you get these like perfectly squared corners. But I always try to work around the tools that I have on hand and try to make it as simple and fast as possible. Because again, that's how I keep costs down. So I do these tricks with routers and stuff like that, so I can get the job done to work just as well. In less time. And there you can see that's a slightly different butterfly shape I made that cut a little bit better. But I think I'm still going to develop that some more for future use to make it really work well with my router, so I have a little bit less of this like sort of filling to do. And then I used some epoxy to fill in those cracks after I had those butterflies in. And here's a mistake I made that you'll see in later videos. I had a little bit of this black epoxy left over, and so I used it before it dried out to glue my truss rods and some graphite. I put graphite reinforcement in the 5 strings and just truss rods in the 4 strings. And I didn't see any problem with it. I was like, oh, waste not, want not. Use a little bit of epoxy, but it actually bleeds through the wood a little bit on one of them, which I'll show you in the next video probably. There's a lot of sanding to do, of course, but right now I'm only focusing on the top so I can get the fingerboards and top plates glued on, and then once they're on, I'll do all the finish sanding and shaping. So I'm just trying to sand the areas I don't think I can get to, and I put a little round over on this top plate, but what I didn't think about until after, and I noticed when I started gluing it on, is that I should not have rounded over this part right here, because that's the part that butts up against the fingerboard, and so now you can tell it's 2 pieces, whereas if I had left that flat, it would look more like the old instruments in one piece. So next time I'll know not to do that. And I drilled these little holes in my parts as I cut them just for guides to help me align everything. And I used little tiny bits of broken pencil in there to clamp the top on. I figured I would clamp the top on first since that had guides, and then that would give me something to line my fingerboard up against and make sure that was all proper, because there's no guides in that. This is a new way of gluing these up for me, and I was really trying to be careful not to have any squeeze out in areas that would be difficult to clean. And, I didn't do the best I can, but I learned a lot, and so, the next batch will be better. And, of course, I have some of these that are not going to have that closed face, so I had those to put together, too. This feels like a pretty good place to wrap up. Next time, we will actually start getting some strings on some of these bad boys and seeing what they sound like. See you then.